with very real limitations I thought would hold it back. Oh boy, was I wrong. This is the GFX100 RF, and it's my favourite camera. Before we get into the bulk of the video, what do you want to order here? I think a sizzling meatball melt, maybe? I don't know. In this day and age, it's hard to really find the perfect camera. I mean, what is the perfect camera? And expanding on that again, is perfection really what we need in a camera? Or is it the feeling we get when we take a photo? Something I'm really excited by this, and it's going to sound completely different towards anybody else really talking about it, is this. A camera strap that I actually love. I know it sounds really petty almost, but camera manufacturers have been producing these terrible straps for such a long time, and this one I can see myself actually using. Let's talk about perhaps one of the more controversial things with the camera, and that's the lens. I hear people talk about the most is the fact that this is a 35mm fixed lens medium format camera, and it's f4, which means, and what I think a lot of people think it means, is it's bad in low light situations, opposed to other cameras like the Leica Q3 and the FUJIFILM X100 that have those lighter lenses. Does that really matter here? And I found an interesting test. Okay, very dark, probably can't see it. So this is at ISO 8000 f4 at 60th of a second. We'll come back to this photo in great detail later on, but zooming in right now, we can really see the amount of detail, and the sort of grain profile is really excellent. Now what I'm going to do is compare this to the Leica Q3 43. I don't have any images of the Q3, but I did take the same photo in the same sort of area as, you know, both cameras, and the one on the left is of course the Q3 and the one on the right is of course the GFX. Zooming into these photos, you can really see the amount of detail that has been retained, and I have pushed these images and matched them up as best as I can with no change to the grain profile. Again, both JPEGs, and the performance here from the GFX100 RF I'd say is actually a little bit better. This can only really be 100% guaranteed with the RAWs, but with GFX being zoomed in 13 times and then the Leica being zoomed in 7 times, you can see that it is performing really well for a camera that has a larger sensor and much more megapixels. And of course this is filmed after, as most of these videos tend to be. What I would say is, with this camera, the photos that I took with it, and the majority of the photos I took with it, I couldn't help but love. They have something else about them, a unique quality, a unique kind of like feel, and something that I only feel like medium format could actually give. And with that, let's get into it. Let's talk about the specs. Of course, this is the lightest and smallest GFX camera in the range that they actually have, and GFX meaning it's a medium format, which means it has a larger sensor size than a full frame or an APS-C camera. With that, you have some slight quirks to it. For example, this is a 35mm camera. However, its equivalent focal length is more akin to a 28mm, making it a lot wider than you would actually usually shoot photos with. To go further in depth with the lens, of course the X100VI has a 23mm lens, which equates to a 35mm. The Leica Q3 has a 28mm lens, which is, well, a 28mm lens, and this is a 35, which is equivalent to a 28mm lens. However, the thing that doesn't get talked about here is the compression of the actual lens is entirely different. For the GFX100 RF, the compression is that of a 35mm lens, making the photos appear more natural, although substantially wider. The other side of it is that this is a fixed lens camera, so you aren't actually able to change out the lens in the camera itself. Now, there are a lot of these cameras on the market, and of course Fuji have the X100VI, which is vastly popular. And it also has a faster lens, which means its low light capabilities isn't necessarily as good as what you'd get out of the APS-C lineup. Of course, you've got a wide dynamic range, and it goes from an ISO value of 80 to 12,800. Now with that dynamic range, I think this photo kind of shows it off the most. As you can see, the background kind of like highlight situation is overpowered, but you still got a lot of detail there. And then also in the shadow areas, there's a lot of detail there. Also, this is my missus. She's beautiful. You do have subject detection AF in here, however, as with most Fujifilm autofocus, it's not the best autofocus system in the world. However, it does work pretty well. It can recognize faces, animals, birds, cars, bikes, planes, and trains, which is great, but you're still shooting on a 35mm f4 lens or a 28, so you're never really going to take a photo close-up of an animal, right? I did actually in this video, but not in general. Now we're going to come into the thing that I think I was actually most widely surprised I liked about this camera, because usually when they bake in this kind of stuff, I kind of like mock it and think it's a bit terrible. And that is, of course, your digital teleconverter. So with this one, you have the ability to move it into a 45, a 63, and an 80mm. And this is something that I used again and again on my day to just give me a little bit more range where I perhaps needed to. My worst enemy, stairs. These stairs are absolutely evil. Let me see if I still put up here. There you go. Not a bad sight, really, is it? From here, of course, it's a lot higher up. You can actually see the Principality Stadium over there, which is kind of the goal. I've actually just knackered myself out though. It may seem a little bit overkill, and I think when you're really comparing it to other cameras, you're comparing it to the Leica Q3, not the 43, the Q3, and there's a little bit of difference between the two. Of course, when it comes to the Q3, what you've essentially got there is a full frame camera that does 28mm, which is what is equivalent to the full frame on here. Of course, with the Q3, you've got a low aperture lens, which means it's technically better in low light. However, that's not necessarily always the case. And it's because this has a larger sensor, the pixels are bigger, which means the quality of the photos is actually a lot better. And do you necessarily need that low aperture? I don't think so. Because people that want to take quality photos are bumping up the aperture, and the GFX really does that quite well, and there's a nice decent wide angle there. On top of Cardiff Castle, I was speaking to a number of people, including an American. She was lovely, and we were talking about Castle Rock, which is really quite far away, as this guy is actually showing. Yeah. What I wanted to do is to show the tourists that, you know, you can actually see Castle Rock in the distance. So I took a photo and I zoomed in on the back of the screen. Unfortunately, I didn't record this encounter, but it's a nice way to be able to use the 100 megapixels, I guess. Obviously, this is a shot at the 80mm end of the digital converter and then zoomed in another 7 times. So at this point, it is just mush, but you can still kind of see it, which I feel like is impressive in and of itself for a 28mm lens. And opposed to other cameras, such as the Leica Q, which has a similar sort of thing, this is a 100 megapixel sensor, so even at the 80mm end, you're still getting a really good quality image that can be blown up or, you know, used in a different way. And I was actually surprised at how much I used it, but also how the ergonomics of the actual camera actually worked whilst I was kind of out and about shooting, and made that process as easy and as seamless as possible. You do have the ability to shoot 4K 30 at 422 10-bit video inside the camera at f-log, which is great. It's nice to see that. It's a slightly lower quality than the other GFX cameras can actually produce. However, I think it's enough for what I think most people are going to be using this camera for. and I don't necessarily think they're going to be using it for video in the first place. Not fantastic video specs here. It's not a video orientated camera, doesn't necessarily need to be. The next thing is something I absolutely loved, because my personal dream camera is the Hasselblad X-Pan, and that is the ability to change the aspect ratio of your photos with a dial that's situated on the top. So just up here we've got a nice little view over Cardiff. It's not massive or anything, but it kind of interchanges into the section there, and you're going to see if I can get a X-Pan shot here. So we'll go like that. I'll show you now. And it allows you to basically switch between a lot of different things. And there's actually a little secret Easter egg with this feature on the camera. As if you actually look at the aspect ratio as it changes, it shows you a tiny photo of the camera that it is mimicking in the actual camera on the screen, which I thought was a nice little Easter egg there, and it was cool to see. There is aspect ratio markers on the screen showing you what it's going to look like after the photo's been taken. You got a 4x3, a 3x2, a 16x9, a 65x24, a 17x6, a 3x4, a 1x1, a 7x6, a 2x4, a 5x4, a 5x4. Whew, I should have said that a little bit slower, or actually done it on the camera a little bit slower. But those are the ratios. There you go. Let's talk a little bit about the ergonomics of the GFX100 RF. Probably need to stop mentioning the entire thing whilst reviewing it, but the ergonomics, absolutely fantastic. When I first had a look at this camera, because it's my first time actually really holding it, I thought it wasn't going to be comfortable, and it looked, although very similar to the X100, it didn't quite look like it, and I didn't necessarily like the fact it doesn't show the brand name on the front of it like most other cameras do these days, but you don't necessarily need that in order for it to be a good camera. But getting it in the hands and now playing with some of the design decisions, especially when it comes to the switches, for example, changing the aspect ratios, the zoom in mode, it all works in making the experience of taking photographs seamless. Fault but mine, 'cause your heart on the line. Don't quit your day job, Stuart. Your singing's not particularly very good. Of course, you got the return of the 20 film simulations inside of the camera, and I was really happy with the colours for the most part. Out of the film simulations, I think they do a really great job on it. It's not necessarily something I always strive for when it comes to taking photos. However, you know, having the film simulations back again is great. You don't necessarily have the dial for the film simulations like you do on the other Fujifilm cameras of recent, like the XM5 and the XT50. However, this is a slightly higher budget camera, as it comes in at around about £4,699, so it's a very expensive little device. Hopefully going to catch the Princess Catherine. Yeah. I've done it a couple of times before, but I'm pretty much doing everything today with this camera device. However, it's actually priced very competitively when you consider this up against the Leica Q3 and the Q3 43. The viewfinder on here was actually excellent on there. That is a 5.76 million dot OLED viewfinder, and it is absolutely beautiful to behold. And it's incredibly high definition, perhaps one of the best viewfinders I've actually used to date. Massively impressed with it. And then of course you've got a tilt screen there, and it's a 3.15 inch tilt screen, which is absolutely fantastic. So those are the general specs. Love the cap as well, this is great. It does actually come with another hood. It's one of the more square kind of hoods. I kept it in this kind of form factor because I kind of preferred it with my bag in particular, because I was taking out other cameras to review on the day. So I'm just going to show you how to apply the filter as well as the lens hood. All you have to do is unscrew the front ring and then match up the ring that allows you to put the filter on it to the front of the camera. There are 2 notches here and then 2 notches on the ring itself. These then link together and you screw it on. This link is actually incredibly secure, which is quite nice, and then this gives you access to being able to put the lens hood on the front of the camera really quite simply. It just clicks on And it's your more kind of like traditional old film camera kind of lens hood with the rectangle front to it. It does have a slide that comes out to open it up, and then there you go. There's your very posh looking GFX100 RF. Absolutely wonderful. And there are a lot of things that when I originally looked at the camera I thought I was never going to use, and a little bit gimmicky. And I must admit, Fujifilm, I like that. They produce these weird things that you never think you would end up using, and then you end up using them just all the time. The crop mode in particular, fantastic. The ability to quickly zoom in and zoom out with the ergonomics on the actual camera itself, brilliant. This is actually a little bit of an impressive camera. Again, it's probably more for people that want to get the highest quality imaging possible, and I think it should be delivering that. Of course, we're going to do a little bit of a check through the photos later on in the video, so make sure you stay tuned for that. But at the moment, where it stands, the GFX100 RF is absolutely killing it, and I'm actually massively impressed. This is the Norman Church at Cardiff Bay. As you saw in the video so far, I actually took a boat down to Cardiff Bay and took a photo of Norman Church. However, you're probably asking yourself, that looks mighty close to be a photo from the GFX. And that photo right there, I'd be quite happy to print, and it's a decent quality. I'll double tap that. That's the actual photo of the Norman Church that I took on the day. Look at that. Absolute incredible quality. It was shot at f8 to make sure, you know, we're grabbing the photo in the highest kind of fidelity as possible. And everything in this photo is ridiculously sharp. Like, the thing I would say is that the photos themselves, they just have a certain characteristic behind them. As you can see, I shot quite a lot in the Pan F mode because I shot quite a lot in the Hasselblad X-Pan mode because I just like the X-Pan kind of like thing, really. And jumping over to portraits, bumped into my missus after work, and let's just zoom in on her eye and look how incredibly sharp that photo is. And this is just a JPEG. This is not edited. This is actually film simulation. I have edited some of the colors because I quite like my colors. The normal black and white mode, straight out of camera, no edits done to it at all. And super sharp, lovely characteristics, really great dynamic range, because on most cameras, that background there would be blown out to all hell. But as you can see here, there's a hell of a lot of detail in the blacks, as well as in the highlights there as well. And the bokeh in general is just absolutely stunning. Coming around to some more kind of like architecture kind of photos. This is taken out of a window, so the only thing that's going to degrade the sharpness here is how much muck is on the window. But we have a look, and as you can see, absolutely fantastic, just with the film simulation straight from the camera. Super sharp, and you know, even the background building there is also sharp there as well, which is absolutely excellent. Also, for taking photos of things moving quite quick, this was a Tesla that popped past our bus whilst I was just traveling in between locations, and I managed to grab this photo. Again, film simulation inside of the camera, super sharp. I mean, absolutely ridiculous. Probably shouldn't zoom in on his license plate, and overall really pretty damn awesome. I was down Cardiff Bay for this kind of like part of the shoot, and this is perhaps one of my favourite photos of the day, mainly because you've got the kids cycling right here, which I feel like kind of adds the sort of like child-like wonder in the bay and the dock area. And you know, the composition of all of these pillars around it, I think worked out quite well. And like I said, everything's super sharp from the pillar to the background there as well. It's absolutely ridiculous. And sort of like even the tonal range of it, again, this is the film simulation from the GFX, and as you can see, the tonal range of the black and white is just absolutely beautiful. Again, you've got detail in the dark areas, as well as like high amount of like detail in the light areas. And you got to bear in mind that it wasn't actually shot at, this isn't actually edited in RAW. This is just the JPEG out of the camera. I'm just completely over the moon with how great all of these photos came out just in general. The zoom in capabilities of the digital teleconverter. We've got this photo right here, which is great, but the boat, I couldn't get over the other side of the boat, so you know, a lot of the boat is in the image, so it kind of makes it a little bit more messy. But going to that 80mm, I managed to actually compose it in a much easier and more flattering way, looking for an opportunity where there was like a single car in between the two light pylons, and it all kind of came together. So this is a zoomed in 80mm shot. We kind of zoom in again, and even though it's 100 megapixels, even though it's like a cropped in from that 100 megapixel sensor, the photo still remains printable, still usable, and still very, very high quality. And again, although I didn't necessarily, you know, I wasn't necessarily taking photos of birds, this is the swan I took on the boat whilst it was moving, and that's the wide image there. So the ability to crop in and pick your compositions more is absolutely amazing. Hey, I mean, what I could do is probably cut out the buildings at the top there, make it a little bit less distracting, and just have the swan. It's just, what I would say is the capability of this, of the GFX100 RF, is absolutely exquisite. And although it feels very limiting when you first look at it, you know, you've got a 35mm f4, yes, you've got a 100 megapixel sensor, but your low light situations aren't going to be super fantastic, and you're always going to end up struggling. And to a certain extent that was true, because I was always afraid to push that ISO. And then I remembered the GFX100 Mark II actually performed pretty well in low light. And coming back to this, I showed it earlier, this is the stairway that I was talking about with the low light capability, and it had a really terrible tungsten light in it that just wasn't particularly great. But as we can see, even in the darker areas, there's still actually detail there, and also in the lighter areas. I mean, we can zoom in even more. You can see grain in the image at this point. This is really zoomed in, and it's, you know, it's a 100 megapixel image, but zoomed all the way out, it actually works really well as a black and white photo, and it's actually a portrait photo. So there you go, and it just worked out really well for that particular image. And then you've also got a great hall there, which has these really terrible lights in there. This is, I had edited some of the colors around, but just literally some of the colors. As you can see, there's not much in terms of grain. I didn't use any sort of like denoiser in there, and this is like ridiculously zoomed in, right? This is of the roof up there. The image is still incredibly serviceable, and it's still super sharp, even with like as sharp as what you would expect out of like a high ISO shot. This is shot at 8000 ISO, and it's still something I feel like if I wanted to, I could print and be very happy with the image. This is the first medium format camera in the digital lineup of cameras that actually has a leaf shutter. Now, the X100, I believe, has a leaf shutter as well. This one does too, which basically makes the shutter really silent. So if you're doing street photography or trying to be a little bit more incognito with the photos you're taking, you have that capability there, and it's just too damn beautiful. Coming back to more of a cityscape. Yeah, coming back to more of a cityscape and talking a bit more about the digital converter there. So this was on top of Cardiff Tor, inside of Cardiff Castle. And like I said, you're still getting that insane sharp detail that you're expecting out of a GFX lineup. This was kind of the main kind of like general image of the area that I got. I was quite happy with, and then that was using the digital teleconverter. I managed to capture a point where a seagull was coming in, and I kind of like those shots where the birds kind of break them up a little bit. Crazy useful tool that I didn't think I was going to use when I was touching this camera, and it was just a lot of fun to actually have and to use, and really impress. For general street photography as well, this is just a quick photo I took of somebody walking past there, or kind of wanted to position them directly in the center of the shot and use the lines of the St. David's Hall as a sort of like way to counterbalance the image. Again, she is in quite a highlight situation, but even if we look into the darkness, you can still see there is actually a decent amount of detail there still in the image. And then coming back to a photo I took inside of the Cardiff market, which again is not the brightest situation. I had to perhaps use a lower shutter speed to be able to actually grab the image that I wanted to. It all came out quite well. This is a general kind of like street photo shot. It's not massively sharp. I believe it focused more on the foreground than it did the back. But the photo's still incredibly serviceable. And this is a photo I grabbed of one of the vendors there. He's pretty cool. He does some really cool stuff there. Should check him out. And the photo came out pretty decent. Again, it's a different kind of lighting situation there, and it worked out pretty damn well. So I feel like I could actually talk about this forever. The GFX100 RF, in my opinion, is the best premium compact camera you can buy on the market. It's not too much bigger than what you'd see out of the Leica Q series. You've got a higher megapixel sensor and a larger sensor there as well, with a really great grain profile. I don't know what the RAWs are going to be like because Lightroom hasn't updated yet for the RAWs for the GFX100 RF in the time of me filming this, but the JPEGs were actually very serviceable. The only thing that I would probably say against this is I really like, well, in comparison to the Leica Q3, is I really like the DNG on there, just because if there's a new camera out, I can edit it straight away. And I feel like more camera manufacturers just need to use the DNG profile, because the Sigma BF also used the DNG as well. So it was just really, they're really nice to work with, and they're just lovely. I would wish they did more with DNG. But overall, this camera, absolutely excellent. You've got 2 SD card slots, a camera that's just really fantastic to use, and still remaining that sort of like incognito thing that you would actually really want to actually have out of a camera. No real bad things I can say about it. The camera overall was an absolutely excellent experience, as it really expected from Fujifilm at this point. And if you are looking at it, or if you're comparing it to the Leica Q3, I would probably pick this over the Q3, because for one, I think it's got a reasonably smaller profile, at least on the width kind of side to it. At least on the depth kind of like side to it, it can fit in your bags quite easy. It's got a very similar profile to the Instax wide Evo, which, you know, I love that.